Good morning. So, in the heart of darkness, in the worst moment in our nation's history, you can be a hero. We can be heroes. And that is the theme of today's show. We have seen Donald Trump's Gestapo force, his, I would call them private militia paid for by our taxes, this lawless group of thugs rounding up peaceful, productive, community oriented non-criminals, rounding them up and ripping them from their homes, their families, and their communities. And people are saying, no effing way. First, I want to share with you a scene from San Diego, California, of a community, this ICE force out of town. Let's watch.
Fucking shame! 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 Back up! Yeah, back up! Back up! Shame! 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 Shame!
Yes. This is what we need.
Shame! 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 Back up! Yeah, back up! That's right!
You get the idea. It goes on and on. If we believe in the rule of law, and if we want to stop what is happening now that is only getting worse with Stephen Miller's ridiculous quotas, then this is what we must do. And it's for anyone and everyone. And so I want to share with you what was happening, not just in San Diego, California, but all the way across the country in Massachusetts. Students are heroes here. There was a high school child, teenager, maybe he's 18, Marcelo, who was on the sports team. I think it was right after his graduation, who was whisked away. Let's hear about this in the local news first.
It's not a criminal. He's a member of his community, and he's never done anything wrong.
Juliana's Rentes can't believe her boyfriend Marcelo is currently in ICE detention.
He told me he had chains around his ankles, he had chains around his wrists. He's in a cell with 30 other men. He's the only 18-year-old there. He's the youngest there.
Friends and family say Milford is the only home Marcelo has ever known, moving here when he was just 6.
To just separate him from everybody he knows, like his whole life, just because he wasn't born here, it's not right.
The Milford High School junior was detained Saturday morning while driving to volleyball practice.
When we got the news that he was taken into custody, we were all heartbroken. People were crying. Other people just didn't know what to say. No words were exchanged in the locker room. Everybody kind of just parted ways after that.
His teammates and coaches describe him as an asset on and off the court.
Receiving the actual news when we got to practice, it sunk in that it was as serious as it was, knowing that somebody in our community, somebody that we held so dear to us, could be affected like this.
Our athlete who was detained, it may be the friendliest person in the school. Every day, no matter how he felt, he always had a smile on his face. He not only was happy himself, he made other people smile.
Milford Public Schools say they play no part in immigration enforcement and supports all students and families, including those who immigrated to the country. The superintendent released this statement, which reads in part, "They are members of the community, students in our classrooms, athletes that compete representing Milford, musicians, artists, friends, and neighbors."
I live in a town where I'm proud to say that I feel everybody should be welcome, and seeing people being stripped from their homes, their cars, like in these kind of situations, it's upsetting.
Classmates, friends, and family are now struggling to understand why ICE would target someone so young and promising.
Okay, this is the harsh reality I want to share with you Tuesday morning because we can do something about this. Now, let me tell you what these kids did. They did what they knew they could do, and they went out and they've drawn media attention to this. They obviously have a lawyer for their friend. Let me share with you these student heroes now. One last piece. What are you looking at? The students on the lawn of the high school at Milford High shouting "Free Marcello." They engaged in a walkout to support him because he is being detained by ICE. Let's keep going. Okay. The reason why I'm doing this is some people say, you know what, do something like to members of Congress. They'll say, do something to independent journalists like myself. They say, what can I do? This is something we can do. And let me just add one more layer to this. What we can also do is this. Please watch tomorrow. I have a special guest coming on the show. It is Ezra Levin, the co-founder of Indivisible. Yes, he is going to be here talking about the No Kings mass protest scheduled for June 14th. That is a week from this coming weekend. Again, let me put him back up here. Ezra Levin, super excited. We've worked together before. He's going to be on here rallying us to figure out how we can stop this fascism in its tracks. So thank you for indulging me on this. We can make a difference. This is lawlessness to the nth degree. Now, speaking of ridiculous people working for Donald Trump, besides his lawless ICE force, we also have RFK Jr. You know how much I love talking about the head of Health and Human Services. And what's really nice is when Cassie Hunt interviews him. And by the way, the other day I referred to her as Breonna Keeler. It wasn't her. They both work on CNN. But here's Cassie Hunt, and she's calling RFK Jr. out on his own lies. And he tries to back off, but she almost played the tape for him. Let's go.
Your skepticism about vaccines. And over the summer in an interview, you said, quote, "There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective." Do you still believe that?
I never said that.
So stop me. We have the clip. Please play the clip.
You've talked about that the media slanders you by calling you an anti-vaxxer. And you've said that you're not anti-vaccine, you're pro-safe vaccine. Difficult question. Can you name any vaccines that you think are good?
I think some of the live virus vaccines are probably averting more problems than they're causing. There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective. What I'm saying is that none of the 72 vaccines has ever been tested in a safety study pre-licensing.
So let me ask you if you think it's wise for people to take these vaccines, because you had this to say on a different podcast about whether people with young babies should be getting them shots. Watch.
For many, many years, I think parents were so gaslighted and they were scapegoated and they were vilified and marginalized, so that even parents of kids who were very, very badly injured knew what happened to their kid, but they were just reluctant to talk about it. And I think now those days are over. Our job is to resist and to talk about it to everybody. If you're walking down the street, and I do this now myself, which is, I don't want to do, I'm not a busybody. I see somebody on a hiking trail carrying a little baby, and I say to them, better not get them vaccinated. And he heard that from me. If he hears it from 10 other people, maybe he won't do it. Maybe he will save that child.
Maybe he will save that child. You think preventing vaccines for a child will save that child? Do you still say this to parents today?
What I say again is I had 3 vaccines, Casey, when I was a kid, and I was fully compliant.
My kids got 72. The current recommendations are, I think, around 77. And
I have a vaccine record for my child, and there are not 77 shots.
Right, he's full of shit.
77 doses. There are 72 doses of 16 vaccines. Oh, that's just a fact.
Do you see what he just did there? I just cannot imagine being on a hiking trail and this guy doing this. Not only that, he is encouraging others to say, don't get your kids vaccinated, trying to use a kind of not just public pressure, but a psychological, ill-informed torment where you start to wonder, am I doing a bad thing? I just heard all these people saying, don't get my kid vaccinated. And as a result, that child could either get sick, very ill, have long-term consequences, maybe face death. That the odds are low, but that could happen, or get someone else sick, spread measles, spread mumps, spread rubella. We are trying to end these diseases, polio. He doesn't have any shame. I almost feel like people should be shouting shame, shame, shame at him. But you know what? What was good is Cassie Hunt didn't put up with his bullshit. She played the tape. She showed him what he said, and she confronted him with it. That is how we do this. Now, speaking of people facing the consequences of their own words or actions, yes, it's time for Karma Kitten. Fuck around and find out. In today's episode of Karma Kitten, we have the law firms who not only bent the knee, but paid Donald Trump money in the form of promised pro bono work, millions of hours of volunteer work. And what is happening? Let's take a look. I think you probably know. Law firms that appease Donald Trump and angered their clients. There is a piece, yes, my friends, in that socialist rag known as the Wall Street Journal. It is fantastic. And the law firm piece, I'm going to throw it up into the chat. Law firms who appeased. And I will pull this up right here. Excellent. I'm going to drop this right in our chat, and then we are going to talk about it. Here we go. And this would be a good time, my friends, to hit like, so that you, or like, and also subscribe. It's free, so you don't miss any show. Now, I'm doing something new. Be warned. There is a beta opportunity here where I can show the comments on the stage. So let's, oh, no. I see what this is. That is weird. Never mind. I can still, here we go. I can still throw these up here without that beta. Okay. So do what Deb says. Support independent media. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, and share. Thank you, my friends. Okay. So let's talk about this Wall Street Journal piece, okay? This is fabulous for lawyers like me who love to see some Karma Kitten happening. So here's this piece. Law firms that appeased Trump and angered their clients. After firms struck deals to avoid punitive executive orders, some big clients decided to take their business elsewhere. Wow, we have, oh my gosh, we've got Aaron Mulvaney, Emily Glazer, C. Ryan Barber, and Josh Dowsey. This is an incredible team reporting on this. Guys, this is super, super good. I know that I realize that I think I'm supposed to be scrolling down, and you guys are not actually seeing it. Oh, I know why. Here we go. Let me share that with you and take Karma Kitty away. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share the screen with you. This should work. Tell me if you can see it. Yes, you can. Awesome. Okay, so here is that headline that you saw. And let's read this. At a recent luncheon at Cipriani in Midtown Manhattan, a top lawyer for Citadel delivered a message to leaders of some of the country's biggest law firms. Brooke Cuccinella told them that the hedge fund company likes to work with law firms that aren't afraid of a fight. Cuccinella, head of litigation and regulatory inquiries at the business headed by Republican mega donor Ken Griffin, made no mention of politics. But some of the lawyers in attendance took her remarks as a reference to a controversy that has been roiling the legal industry. Some of the listed attendees worked for firms that had cut deals with the White House to avoid punitive executive orders by President Trump. Others were at law firms that had gone to court to fight them. And support for law firms that didn't make deals has been growing inside of the offices of corporate executives. At least 10 big companies are moving work away from law firms that settled with the administration or are giving or intend to give more business to firms that have been targeted but refuse to strike deals. Among them are giant Oracle, investment bank Morgan Stanley, an airline and a pharmaceutical company. Microsoft expressed reservations about working with a firm that struck a deal, and another such firm stopped representing McDonald's in a case a few months before a scheduled trial. You love to see it. Now, you may say to me, Jennifer, but these big, giant corporations like, a major hedge fund, they're not exactly a voice of populism. But my friends, here's what it is. We don't want consolidation of power. It is actually a good thing if we have these giants fighting themselves at the top, because we don't want Donald Trump and his teams to be in a situation where they all decide to just enforce their view of the world, their worldview, have control from the top. The fact that this is splintering off and that these major businesses have decided that aligning themselves with Donald Trump isn't worth it. And this could relate to Taco. Trump always chickens out. Not only that, he doesn't actually live up to his promises. And so they have realized, even though the law firms who used to represent some of these folks thought it'd be better to bend the knee because they needed access to the Trump administration, these folks are smarter than all that. And they understand that fighting, taking it to the mat, leaving nothing out is what they need from their lawyers. And I love it. I flippin' love it. Now, there is more. There is more. Speaking of hedge funds, and now we're going to get into, we've been doing a little intersection of money, law, and power. Like, why are our tax dollars paying for this lawless Gestapo rounding up decent people, children, babies, teenagers? Why? And we're talking about using our voices to protest, running these people out of town where we can, drawing attention. And we've also talked about the intersection between money, law, and power, literally, where one of the most powerful enterprises in the world, the Citadel Hedge Fund, is saying, Karma Kitten, you bow down and we will not hire you. That is what they are saying. Fuck around and find out. We want people who are fierce representing us. So we've got that. But let's face it now. I cannot say that the hedge fund industry, right, or private equity are heroes. In fact, private equity, which is an industry which is, they're similar to hedge funds. These are private pools of capital that are not regulated under the same legal system that things like mutual funds have been since the 1940s, right? We're getting in on almost 100 years of regulation of these kinds of funds. There's a kind that escape from that, and these are the so-called hedge funds and private equity. Essentially, there's no word hedge fund in the legislation. It's just essentially a non-regulated or under-regulated private pool of capital. So what's the difference between a hedge fund and private equity. The biggest difference is with a hedge fund, it's like a portfolio similar to a mutual fund that is allowed to take all kinds of different manner of risks and charge more to the investors and so on. Okay, so that's a hedge fund. It's just a big pool of investments. Private equity is a bit different, and here is where I generalize, but private equity is also a private pool of funds, but it's more like private equity is more like a holding company, like a major corporation holding company, but instead of being owned by public shareholders, like you might own stock in, the Gap Inc., or you might own stock in Microsoft, right? And they have what you're owning stock in is the parent corporation that has then its subsidiaries, its operating businesses. With private equity, the owners at the top of the holding company enterprise are private people. They could be executives, or they could be a private equity. It's basically a private equity fund itself that buys up these portfolio companies that used to be, instead of just buying stock in a company, they take it private. And the theory is that private equity is purchasing these companies that are mismanaged, that might go out of business, and they're going to save them. But the trouble is, very often, these private equity firms prey upon companies that are struggling in a retail market, and they end up stripping from them all the cash. And then these firms go into bankruptcy, reorganizations, and they break them up, and sometimes they're never heard from again. I'm keeping this very general, but there's a lot that's been written by private equity. Now, why the fuck am I talking about private equity? This is because for years, there has been an effort underway to make the people who run private equity firms pay their fair share of taxes. But the way these are structured is that there is a special thing called a carried interest loophole. And I don't want to get into fully the tax weeds of this. It's been talked about for years, and maybe you are familiar with it. But the idea is, if you make money, if you have income from your job, you know what happens. They withhold taxes from it. Or if you have income, you've got a side business, right? You've got a side hustle. You sell stuff on Etsy, or you run a, landscaping business, or what have you. You're supposed to pay taxes on your income. But the way the private equity folks have organized this is they have organized, or they refer to what would normally be referred to as the income they make from running these firms they purchase, reorganizing, or running them into the ground. They characterize that as carried interest as opposed to income. So if you call something carried interest, it can be characterized that way under the law, then you're not paying income tax. You're paying a much lower rate of tax. They're treating it more like, let's say, and again, speaking generally, like investment income instead of what earnings, which they should be paying taxes on. So for years, people have said they're going to close the loophole. In fact, when Donald Trump was running for office the first time, he was like, this is a racket. I'm going to close the private equity loophole. Didn't happen. In fact, private equity, at the very last minute, in the Trump tax, the disastrous tax bill that they're now trying to re-up, that was signed almost around Christmas Eve in 2017. Do you know everyone was complaining about this last minute change in the bill? And you might remember that the senator from Texas, not Texas, I am so sorry, who decided to, Kristen Sinema is her name, at the last minute, she was totally in affiliation with a private equity firm, and there is a change in the legislation to help private equity in there. It's unrelated to the carried interest loophole. So not only did private equity continue its special treatment, they got even more treatments in this tax code, as far as it was explained to me by someone in the Senate when I met them shortly after this was enacted. Okay, so now let's get to this. Andrew Ross Sorkin is on CNN, and he's talking to a representative in Congress, Darren LaHood, about this and trying to say, why are we doing this? This doesn't help people. And he wiggles and he waffles. And I want you to hear this because there are actually some people asking good questions if you know what they're asking, because it seems like they're speaking in code, but they're not. Let's play the tape.
It's my bugaboo, so I'll just ask. It's a small number, but carried interest. Can you explain to me, like I'm 5, why carried interest remains ongoing, not touched by this bill?
Well, again, we can get into details of that, Andrew, but we had a lot of discussion in the Ways and Means Committee. The Senate will talk about this now. But if you look at what private equity and a number of venture capitalists have done in this space in terms of creating more economic growth, right? Letting the private sector flourish and prosper. I think you start with the premise that we're not going to grow the economy with more government spending. We have to let the private sector flourish and grow. And I think the carried interest part of that, we've seen direct results from that have benefited the economy and created more jobs.
Just so we're on the same page, the folks who are benefiting from that are not the folks who are investing their own money. This is not to benefit the investors. This is to.
But the overall industry is a positive.
So my question is, you think you need to incentivize?
So to be clear, it's not the So these private equity firms take over, right? Toys R Us or whatever. They themselves get investors, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about the managers of these firms, okay, who are cheating legally. Let's keep playing, Andrew. Trying to get LaHood to admit that this doesn't help the economy.
The people who work in private equity because they're not incentivized enough.
Well,
the government has, because effectively, that's what we're doing. We're saying.
Okay, so what he's saying is, you're telling me that the people who decide to go into private equity for a living need more incentives, because otherwise we won't have private equity. And LaHood's saying it's such a big contributor to our economy. Like it's not, I mean, it's just questionable to begin with. Like this parasitic industry, these firms could already go right into a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, reorganize, and have more money and more promise for the future than they would, I believe, if private equity came in. And so these private equity guys are coming in. They're looking around for something to suck the life out of and make zillions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. What Andrew is kind of saying here, do these guys need incentives? I don't think so. Let's listen.
The people who work in private equity, people maybe who work in certain parts of oil and gas, people who work in certain parts of real estate, need to be incentivized to do that work. Meaning, and you would say you don't need to incentivize teachers, you don't need to incentivize doctors or anybody else, but that issue, real estate, oil, gas, private equity, venture capital, those people need a special incentive to actually take those jobs, and that they wouldn't take those jobs and those smart people wouldn't do that work otherwise. Is that your position?
Well, I wouldn't put it exactly like that, but what I think we've seen is this provision being in place has allowed private equity to go in and help take over businesses that are distressed and otherwise. I've seen it throughout the Midwest and many of my counties and other places where private equity has come in and created more jobs and economic opportunity. And I think the argument can be made by having this provision in there has allowed for more economic growth.
Compared to what? Compared to what? Created jobs compared to what? What if it would have been better? And why shouldn't they pay taxes? The argument that if you create jobs, you shouldn't pay taxes is not the argument he thinks is a good one. Because all of us, if you hire someone to do something for you, if you run a business, we have not exempted people from tax because they have employees. Come on, man. Okay, I got a couple more things before we get to crazy town. Crazy town. It's been a long time since we've heard from Mike Lindell, Mr. Pillow. But poor Mike Lindell, who is also, ding, 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 facing his karma kitten moment. F around, Mike, and find out, is dealing with litigation involving him lying about the Dominion voting machines. And you kind of would feel sorry for the guy, but it's really nothing to feel sorry for him about when you know the context. And so he is in the middle of a defamation trial. It began yesterday. And the deal is he says, of course, I'm going to testify. And we shall see. He is now making an argument that the other side is withholding from him his ability to defend himself. This is kind of shocking. He is being sued for defamation for lying about former Dominion voting systems. And he's specifically being sued by a CEO, Eric Coomer, who accused Lindell of spreading conspiracies that falsely claimed that his firm had rigged the 2020 election. Okay, so this is what Lindell is facing, and here he is whining in front of the press. Here we go.
But it was also my evidence. So when I come in, I needed that evidence. When you delete evidence, it's like throwing a gun in a river. That's called spoliation in any court case. They threw away my evidence. You think I wasn't upset about that too? But no, I wasn't worried about some court case down the road. I was worried about, I can't believe the cover-up, that they're covering up our elections, starting here in Colorado. That was
He's just digging more of a hole for himself. Glad I'm not there to witness this. It almost feels like crazy town. Birds of a feather. Speaking of unhinged people who either support or literally work for Donald Trump, we have lying Carolyn Leavitt, our Ava Braun Barbie, claiming that the budget bill is actually saving trillions when it is actually raising the deficit by more than $2 trillion. I feel like we should listen to her lies.
Is the most historic piece of legislation to ever move through Congress in modern history. Not only does it save nearly $2 trillion, but it also delivers on the president's key priorities. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime for our law enforcement officers and all those who are putting in extra hours to make ends meet for their families. It also ends taxes effectively on Social Security for our seniors who are dependent on that Social Security income. It also has historic investments in border security, historic funding for the Golden Dome and our national security, and so many other incredible things are packed into this bill. So now it is before the Senate. Those discussions are ongoing, but the president is not going to back down from those key priorities that he promised the American public, and they are expecting Capitol Hill to help him deliver.
Oh my God. Has she gotten more shrill over time? And I know that might seem gender-coded shrill, but men can be shrill. She's very shouty and complainy. And I just don't know how anyone can listen to her. I think in time she will be replaced, because if she's annoying me, and I have a pretty high threshold, I imagine she's also annoying Donald Trump. So again, I want to remind you, tomorrow we are having Ezra Levin speak about the No Kings protest. He will be my guest tomorrow. Please, so you do not miss this show, you need to hit like, you need to subscribe, and then hit that little bell button so you do not miss this. We are going to be starting here on Taub Live, having regular guests of this caliber. I've decided that you deserve it. These are amazing people who we can hear from, not in a 20-second segment, but we give them 20 minutes of our time. So I want you to think about the things you want to ask Ezra, and I will be turning to the chat tomorrow when he is on the show. Okay, it is now time for Crazy Town. So Donald Trump, who has had a very non-progressive, non-understanding of alcohol and drug addiction, who has admired people like Duterte, who is known for just executing people who are drug users, not surprisingly, has a double standard about that. Because of course, he would never criticize someone who basically gave him or supported his campaign to the tune of over $275 million million. So literally yesterday, and this is our crazy town moment, we had the press asking Donald Trump what he thought of Elon Musk's alleged drug use. Let's listen to that.
I like this man.
Were you aware of Elon Musk's regular drug use?
No, I wasn't. I think he's fantastic. I think Elon is a fantastic guy. And
are you troubled by these reports?
I'm not troubled by anything with Elon. I think he's fantastic. Did a great job. And you know, Doge continues, and by the time it's finished, we'll have numbers that'll knock your socks off. It's going to be, he did a fantastic job. And he didn't need it. He didn't need to do it.
Are you kidding me? Are you flipping kidding me? One, nothing bothers him about Elon. He's not going to comment about the drug use or allegations. Didn't say didn't happen, just says it doesn't bother him. Two, he says he's still working for Doge and the savings will knock your socks off. So far, they've been minuscule to none relative to the cost. They have not found the fraud and abuse. They've just created chaos. And most importantly, he didn't need to do it. He sure as fuck did. He was using his role in the government to get lawsuits and investigations against his firm stopped. So he sure as hell needed to do it. And with that, my friends, I bid you adieu. Remember, tomorrow, Ezra 11 of Indivisible. Can't wait to see you then. Have a lovely Taco Tuesday.
Hello, prison mates. It's the Gen Taub Show. Well, welcome everyone. Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today. There is hope, and we are together in this democracy we work for. And again, welcome to the Gen Taub Show.